Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the program this week.
Because at the end of the day, your goal in life is to be happy. The reason you do things is to make yourself happy. And we get that screwed up a little bit.
You must have thought, well, I'm doing all the right things. I'm making money. I should be feeling good now. This should be my life working out just fine. Thank you very much.
But it was really through that I fell in love with the idea of really learning about yourself and then just trying to find the most authentic version of yourself and the most honest version. And the more honest you become with yourself, the more you love yourself, because you have to love yourself with all your imperfections.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.
Tackling the stigma.
Okay, let's get straight into this week's guest, a brilliant guest on the other side of the pond, actually. We're going to Champaign, Illinois with Parham Parastaran. Now, Parham has written a book called Perfect Pain, which is an interesting title, but we'll talk about the reasons for it. Parham, first and foremost, welcome to the programme, and welcome to this UK mental health podcast, Mental Health Monday.
I believe this is my... this is my second UK one, but yeah, it's glad to be here. Very happy to meet you and very glad to be here with you.
Now, there's a couple of conversations I think that maybe in an alternate dimension, we'd be having a conversation about somebody who travelled from Iran to the USA, who then lived the American dream and became a huge business success, and that would be the happy ending. That would be the archetypal American dream story where if you go there, you can make that dream a reality, and you made that dream a reality. But that's not your story, and that's not the end of your journey. It's one which takes a completely different, almost a curveball, at the point at which you would think, well, this is the happy ending.
That's right. I mean, that's what I loved about writing the book, and that's why it was so important that I wrote the book, because many people have different perception of what's important, what is success, and how they define it. And unfortunately, at a very surface level, and most people really just define success and ultimately link that to happiness with financial success and or material success. And they just even though you hear the term money doesn't make you happy kind of a thing, but I don't think people really, they listen to it, they hear, but they don't really get it or subscribe to it until you maybe hear a story like mine, and it was classic. I mean, it was just a classic thing, that it was just just success in the way that the world views success is oftentimes the worst metric for success, for viewing what people, if you assume people are happy. Because at the end of the day, your goal in life is to be happy. The reason you do things is to make yourself happy. And we get that screwed up a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you're obviously now speaking to a UK audience, which, has a large element of that. But in the United States, it's the number one thing, isn't it? It's make the money will bring the happiness as well. You must have thought, well, I'm doing all the right things. I'm making money. I should be feeling good now. This should be my life working out just fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. And when I set out to do it, it was as a result of not having any money. To simply put, is that I came from Iran as a refugee, literally with nothing. My parents, obviously, I was 9 years old, but, literally with nothing. And, we moved 11 different times, and my dad would take odd end jobs. He would drive a bus. He would work at a convenience store. My mom worked at McDonald's and Bob Evans, which is a restaurant, and, did all kinds of odd end jobs. And, I hated being poor. But ultimately the poor really sort of put a light on the shame that I had for being an immigrant. And so it was a combination of just both feeling like a dirty immigrant from Iran during the hostage and revolution that was happening in the 1980s. And so it wasn't pleasant. And so the only thing I can think of to sort of mitigate that pain and ultimately, kind of like brush it over, but it's not a perfectly, is what I learned was people really cherished successful people and people that had money. And if you had money, for some reason, people just liked you. Or if you were good at sports, the same way. But if you were good at these kinds of things, people just liked you, and they could care less what your personality is like. They could care less what your background is. They just automatically, you walk into a room. And so I thought, okay, well, then that's what I'm going to have to do to gain respect, but really try to to hide the hurt that I had from being that poor immigrant boy is really what I was really striving to do.
Well, once you'd made that focus and you had that mindset, how long did that last? How far could that mindset carry you? Because for many people, that's the mindset they will have, and when they start out in business, that's the mindset I'm going to have for the next 40 or 50 years working. How long did it last for you?
Well, I'd like to actually just tell you, like, when people set out for that, it could last indefinitely. Sadly, and I'll put the word sadly in front of that. Sadly, it could last indefinitely, and you'd basically go through your life completely unaware why you're doing those things that you're doing. And I think you could potentially have an empty life and potentially not as find a better version of your best version if you subscribe to that. But for me, I sort of stumbled into it because of my drug addiction. And so I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't aware that deeply why I was doing things. I knew that when I would get mad, I would be really successful. When I would have some painful things happen to me, I would always turn around. If I had a girl dumped me in high school, or a girl didn't like me, or somebody dissed me, I would just take that and I would turn it into something that would really motivate me. So I knew that about me, but I always thought that was a good thing. I always thought it was a good thing where, like, if you get kicked, you get back up, and that's that I used to, pride myself that I had that ability to come back. What it really was I was just always couldn't stand the shame of losing, the shame of being down. It wasn't so much that I was resilient and you get back up. So anyway, fast forward to, having success and business is going good. People would look at me and be like, wow, this is a 26-year-old guy. He's got X amount of stores. He's doing good. I would, went to grad school during all this stuff, and seemingly on the outside, running a very good business. And the business side we could talk about too, but it wasn't a perfect business. It just looked better. It just looked really good because I had a lot of stores at a young age. But what really got me to start understanding it was, like I said, I stumbled into it because I had a massive drug addiction, to the point where, I was spending $1,000 to $2,000 a week on cocaine. And worse than that, it wasn't social. It wasn't like going out as a 26-year-old, who actually was more like 28, 29 when I started, but as a 29-year-old and socializing at the clubs and partying. Mine was dark. I would go lock myself in a room for 2 days or 3 days, or go lock myself in a hotel or a bathroom, and I literally wouldn't come out for 2 days. And obviously that reached, a point where I was destroying family, destroying friends and whatnot. And so I started getting help. And it wasn't through many years of doing psychoanalysis that I unwound some of those things and really discovered why I was doing the things that we're doing. But then, so it took a long time. So the epiphany that happened was not because of just wisdom and age and whatnot. I think that could technically last forever. Many people are really good at that, and they don't necessarily have a massive drug habit or an alcohol problem or a sex predator problem or some type of thing that ends at where they have to start reflecting. Some people just don't reflect and continuously stay on that path.
What I was going to say, that moment of realization, it can come as either an epiphany moment or it can come at a rock bottom moment, and sometimes the two sort of interact as well. If it's rock bottom, that's sometimes when you have no other choice but to go on a different path. Did you have options open available to you because of the business that you built? Opportunities to change your path, but do it on your own terms?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, if I understand you correctly. So, my view of a rock bottom and how you come out of a rock bottom is that you get to a point where you have so much fear that you really screw things up that then you kind of bounce back. But that bounce back is not depthful. It's surface level. It's like almost like an autonomous reaction to something. For example, if I fall down, I kind of get up, but this is just a massive fall. If I fall into let's say 20-foot crater of a hole, you will go into fight mode and figure that out. I don't necessarily call that a recovery. That is just sort of like I got no choice kind of a thing because I've destroyed so many things. So I've had many rock bottom events, but it was. And so kind of to your question, and I've had opportunities to go to, 30 days at Hazleton or go to one of those things. And I never chose that because at the end of the day, there was this weird undercurrent that was going on that I felt like I have I have to figure this out at a deeper level. I'm not going to just go for 60 days to a rehab facility and not really know why in the hell I'm doing what I'm doing. But I still didn't do it. It was this like tug of war between, but I was not going to subscribe to going to Alcohol Anonymous and doing the 12-step thing, because I thought that's silly. Like I don't really have a drug problem. I probably have some other problem. It's not the alcohol or the drug. It's something else. And so it just sort of married to the right time when I ended up meeting this Dr. Jekyll and started doing therapy. And right now it's 2000. So it's almost 17 years now I've been doing this type of therapy. Obviously it's not one of those things you go day one and things are fixed. It takes a long, long time, which is why no one does it. But it takes a long, long time. But, I still go. I got appointment tomorrow. I go constantly. But it was really through that I fell in love with the idea of really learning about yourself and then just trying to find the most authentic version of yourself and the most honest version. The more honest you become with yourself, the more you love yourself, because you have to love yourself with all your imperfections. And that's, part of the title of that book too, we could talk about. But yeah, I looked at other alternatives, but it just wasn't for me until
there was
on the psychoanalysis.
There's the Parham that there's the successful business character that everybody knows. This guy's successful and he's young and he's got going on. And then there's the Parham who locks himself in his room with the addiction. Were those two individual people, as you've sort of reassessed and analysed where you've been at, were they very much the same person with just different aspects to their lives? Or can you separate those two people out and take the good bits from some, leave the bad bits behind?
It's a good question. So I would say from a self-concept point of view, they were the same Parham. From a self-esteem standpoint of view, they were different Parhams. When I was locking myself up, I was in touch with that very low self-esteem, insecure immigrant boy. And that's what I was trying to numb. That's what I was trying to numb. But essentially it's the same thing, because when I was the businessman that everybody, or it wasn't even just, the businessman became second. What was first was I was good at sports and popularity. I was like my high school homecoming king, and I was the quarterback, so that boosted my self-esteem as well. So in many ways, to your point in your question, they were the same thing. That alcohol and drugs were providing me that same that boost, we'll call it initially, especially as it was from being successful or being popular in school or doing well in sports. They were essentially the same thing. So that's why I say they were the same things, but they were split in how I comforted myself and dealt with the pain that underlying that I never really dealt with.
And that brings us on to the title nicely, Perfect Pain. It's a title that some people go, how can pain ever be perfect? Just explain the theory behind the name Perfect Pain.
When it started was before I even started writing the book, I wrote down the name Perfect Pain. And it was at a time in my life where I was feeling incredibly grateful for all the things that what most people would perceive as really negative things that has happened in my life. Okay, so being a refugee escaping from Iran. And when I was in Iran, I was abused for 1 year of my life. Luckily, the revolution happens and I leave. So that was a positive. I stopped being abused because I had to leave the country. But come here, we're poor, we're Iranians. Nobody liked the Iranians at the time because of the hostage crisis that was going on. And we had to lie from, that we were Persian. We'd say we were Persian as opposed to Iran. And so anyway, you had all these things that happened, moved, 11 different times. Unfortunately, not a good relationship with my parents. By good relationship, I mean, there's no connection. They just treated us like, they just dragged us along wherever we went. They don't communicate with us, tell us what we're doing. And so, a poor experience from that standpoint, not a strong family. And and of course the drug habit and all those things. But really what I realized was, gosh, it was perfect, because had I not had these things happen, I wouldn't have gone to therapy and learn about myself and actually learn to love myself with all these imperfections built. So it was the perfect amount of pain, because I do believe that you can have so much bad happen to you that you can't get out of it. For me, it was perfect because it was enough where where it played this battle, because the pain actually helped me be motivated from a business standpoint or hardworking standpoint, right? But then it had this other consequence that made me a drug addict and all the, where I was destroying my personal life. So every time I had a little bit of success, I would destroy myself, right? So the pain played well into motivating me. The pain also ultimately played well into really figuring out who I was. So in essence, it was perfect.
So in terms of that, like, because plenty of people, and I've spoken to many people who have a slightly different mindset, which is they dealt with something in the past, and in many ways they not bury it and move on, but they put it into a box, they compartmentalize it, they put it to one side, and they can move away from it. It's interesting how you've described it there, almost as if that journey, that pain, that experience you've had is with you all the time, and actually you use that pain to sort of take your next steps forward.
Yeah,
if you
and
like.
No offense tended to folks who take that and put into a box. I think everybody must find a different way to approach and deal with the things that they had, the troubles or the pains that they have to do. The only thing is that box is going to stay with you forever. And that box is part of who you are. So when you put it in a box and sort of not think about it, you're sort of denying a part of who you are. And I don't believe you can self-actualize, and I don't believe you could really become whole unless you truly see yourself with everything that's happened to you holistically as one unit, as opposed to, when I was in Iran, that was a bad time, or when my mom got divorced. Or they're all part of who you are. They're all part of your undercurrents. They're all part of your conscious, subconscious. They're all part of who you are, and they're going to come up somewhere. That box that you cannot possibly put a box with, because it'll creep up somewhere. It might not creep up in the way you predict it will, but it surfaces. It surfaces.
You obviously had many things that happened to you that were out of your control that you couldn't deal with, but you talk in the book about self-sabotage as well. Where does that kick in? When you're dealing with so many things that you have no control over, for then you to go on a journey where you take steps which almost, damage yourself. Is that sort of symptomatic of the journey that you'd been on? Was that something that was completely unavoidable, or was there another factor in place for that?
I mean, self-sabotage at the end of the day is part of that self-regulation of self-esteem. So a lot of the self-sabotage would be a part of successes that what I would interpret as success. I was very uncomfortable with success because I think it can't happen to me, because I'm not used to that and I don't deserve it, as if it was magic. Okay. And so what you do to sort of negate that or neutralize that and the shame that you have from having success, because it's an uncomfortable thing. And that's directly the times that would correlate with the times that I'd have heavy into self-sabotage. For example, when I was building my business, when I finished college and was building my business, I never went out. I was, everyone used to joke because I was a 26-year-old and a 40-year-old man. Everyone's like, God, you're like an old man, because I just would work and I was motivated by my business. I was obsessed with developing and building my business. I was not self-sabotaging because I didn't have anything to self-sabotage. It was more when I either started recognizing that I'm having a little bit of success, or people were sort of telling me that I was having a little success, that I would get uncomfortable. To this day, my psychiatrist and I still talk about self-sabotage. If I am, and I usually relate it to golf. I can actually watch my pattern when I'm having some of those feelings in the way I play golf. When I'm playing really good golf or tennis, and I continue to do that, then that's when I'm okay. My self-esteem is regulated and it's not bouncing all over the place. But when I'm starting to feel a little bit manic and a little bit high on myself, I tend to play really bad golf, and I tend to do things. I'll be winning, and then for some reason I decide to lose. And I don't necessarily say I'm winning and then I make this point I'm going to lose. It just happens, and I reflect back. I'm like, here we go. And so this is still a constant thing. This is a very constant thing with very, very successful people. Trust me, it's the reason why you have very, very successful people, Bill Clinton and presidents and all these people, enormous power, and then they do these most unbelievable things that you go, why in the hell did you just do that? They don't even know that they're doing it, but it's their own self-sabotaging trickery that they play with themselves.
I was going to ask you that. What are the things in life now where you still spot those signs in and of yourself? Actually, it's interesting to hear you know, it comes out in sports or golf where it's a safe environment now. Thank goodness that you're able to do that now and not be potentially going down trickier paths as well. Does that come with age, or does that come with that 17 years of counseling, do you think?
Well, first of all, it's a great observation, because it's an important observation. Again, something that we talk about all the time. The idea with psychoanalysis in general, and I can relate this to dreams as well, is that I will never, I'm not ever going to be fully regulated where my self-esteem is balanced all the time. I am going to forever and ever have to constantly manage my self-esteem, which is getting high, getting low, and the goal is always to be regulated, okay? But I'm not going to be able to do that because of my background and because of all those things. So what I can do is improve and have a dashboard where I notice these things and observe them. Now, over time, what used to be a horrible thing just becomes, I can see it in my game of golf. Now, once in a while it happens with business, but I make a bad business decision or a bad investment decision, and it actually does happen in those scenarios, but it becomes, it shifts, okay? Same thing that happened in dreams. Dreams are very much related to psychoanalysis. And so I write down and study all my dreams. And over the 17 years when I study my dreams, for example, I've always used to have a dream where, because I used to also be a pilot and I love planes, that I'm flying in a plane and this plane is going crazy, okay, and then ultimately crashes, okay? Now, I never have that dream, but I always still have the plane dreams. But this happened, the plane goes a little bit wobbly, and it kind of centers itself, and it kind of just glides. And that's I have that dream all the time now. It's evolved, okay? I used to have, and I can give you many, many more dreams, but it's a good analogy into what you just asked me, is the same thing that evolved with my dreams is the same thing that happens that evolved with my bad. My bad today is much less bad than my bad 5 years ago, and eventually it'll be the same thing, but I don't think it goes away. I don't think it's part of your development.
Can I ask you, you mentioned there being, popular in high school, you went to grad school as well. What response have you had in terms of your story and your journey from those people who were around you, who would have seen you, growing up, who would have known where you were from, known about some of the difficulties you'd face, seen you been popular at school, academically successful, then successful in business? They would have gone, hey, Parham, he's living the American dream. As you then explain about what was really going on, how have they responded? Have they responded in a positive way? Has there been negative connotations, misunderstandings maybe about what it is you've experienced and why?
Yeah, so the 99% have responded very well, and then the people that knew me even closer weren't surprised. They weren't surprised, but they were surprised. I mean, nobody knew that I was abused, and nobody knew the amount of cocaine I was doing, because I was like any alcoholic or anybody. You get really good at lying, and you get really good at hiding, and you play all these games. And so they didn't know the details of it, but they weren't surprised because they knew I was bigger than life in the same way. I walked around just with this, like, as my wife would call me, I was just like a tornado, or I was just this, like just loud and be in public, and in the table, I would command the table and make the toast, and so none of that surprised anybody, because everybody knew I was a little off, everybody knew, like, I was very grandiose in the way I was. So some of that didn't surprise people. The very, very few people that it did were people that, to be honest with you, were like kind of religious, almost like it's terrible that, you were doing drugs and you were married and those things. And they weren't viewing it that, like, it wasn't that I was trying to do that. It's just, it was, and I was trying to become better and evolve from that. And so there was a little bit of that, but for the most part, because almost everybody could relate to it in some capacity, everybody can pick and relate to it, the overwhelming response has been very positive. And yeah, I was just at a golf tournament in Indianapolis. Actually, somebody that I was very surprised came up to me and said, I read your book. And this guy's like 7-8 years older than me, went to my high school. But he read your book. He's like, you really put it out there. He's like, it's impressive. I said, yeah. And what I could tell was, he was saying basically, I can't believe you said the things that you said that I would like to say.
which I think is one of those brilliant things that we can do. You know, if we can have those conversations, you can often, people say, you know, it's important to talk, but it's also important to listen, because you may well hear in those conversations something which you would have wanted to say or felt you couldn't say, but felt you couldn't say. Obviously, your book has given that connection to some people, and they've been able to make that connection.
One more thing that I found really interesting is that it was different also. If I had to divide it between male and female 100% absolutely loved every part of it. The deep honesty, just the blatant being able to say that I'm insecure, being able to say that I have, you know, low confidence at times, that, you know, they love it. The males were the ones that were like, I can't believe you would, that's a little farther than I would say. And what they're basically telling me is that they're not complete and assuring themselves at this moment in their life when they tell me that, because why would you go this far, but not this far? Like, if you're going to be blatantly honest, is there such thing as being really honest, but 90% of the time? Or, you know, so the males really had an ego problem with telling too much about your blemishes, ultimately.
What does this is the big question now? What does your story tell us about the American dream?
What does it tell about the American dream? Multiple stories. I mean, there's, let's see, off the cuff, I would say, so first of all, it's very possible. If we define the American dream as material and financial success, okay, or upward mobility, I'll call that too, which is ultimately the same thing, but upward mobility, very well intact. It's very possible. I mean, again, with you know, anecdotally, I mean, I just look at myself. You would, if you knew me when I was 9 years old, walking to school, I would walk on the ground looking for money, because I wanted money so bad, because everything in our family was about talking about money and when I can get a cheeseburger. I can wait in 2 weeks when McDonald's does a 29-cent cheeseburger sale. You know, so everything to me was, God, we're poor, man, we're poor, man, we're poor, man. But if you'd have told me when I was 9 years old that I'm going to be retired at 45 years of age, and I had a 10-year battle with drugs, you know, along the way, which is basically my hand, you know, one hand behind my back tied, I would have said no freaking way. You know, I would have said no freaking way. And that part was pure ambition. It was just obsessed about being successful. And if you are obsessed about being successful and upwardly mobile, I don't think it's possible in America for you to not be able to do it. You can hold yourself back. You can make mistakes. You can make all the mistakes you want. But if your mind is so driven on doing that, you will do it, which means ultimately you'll naturally sacrifice, and because you have to sacrifice, and that's what some people don't want to do, but you have to sacrifice to do it. But I believe that's intact. But the problem is, I would like to tell people, don't do the American dream unless you know why you're doing it. You know, do it for the right reasons. You know, do it for the right, not because you're trying to ward off against all of your previous issues and pains and things like that, because then ultimately you're going to get your American dream, and you're going to see what I see every single day in the entrepreneurial world and my friends and a lot of people, a lot of unhappy people, a lot of depressed people, a lot of anxiety. And just look around right now. I mean, during the COVID, it's gotten worse. And so anybody who had this much of a tendency for anxiety and depression now is elevated because of the COVID. If anything, you know, you could say it should be better, but it's not, and it's really shining a magnifying glass on how mentally challenged, mentally troubled our society is. And the only thing I can really link it to is that it's so pressure packed with wanting to succeed. I speak with colleges all the time, and there was an article that they did on mental. It was on me, but it was for our college for the college newspaper, and about mental health and all the suicidal rates in colleges. And I spoke what I thought was one of my best articles. I didn't write the article, but I thought it was one of the best articles. And I really was spoken how troubling it is, because all these kids are going to college, are so competitive. They want to do the American dream and but they're struggling with so much depression and anxiety. And they did this piece, and it just went like poo-pooed. It was literally the best piece that anyone's ever written on anything that I've read, with me involved, and not because of me, but I've had other articles, but it was really the best one. And it honestly was not picked up very much. It was the university staff didn't look at this and be like, holy cow, there's a real problem here. What they're not doing is they're not teaching you both, that you cannot want to reach for this much success without a good foundation. And the way I say it easiest way to describe is that, let's say I set out to build a 20-story building. I get an engineer, I get a structural engineer, and he tells me I need a foundation to structure to be able to handle this much weight, etc. Right? So you do the foundation. Well, American Dream, upward mobility, we don't know how much this upward mobility is ahead of time. So at 9, I didn't say, well, I think by the time I'm 40, I'm going to have $7 million, or I'm going to have $30 million, or I'm going to be a billionaire, or whatever. You don't get to do that. It just sort of happens, right? So you never had the foundation, the mental, the construct underneath to be able to handle that thing, because with success comes a lot of other things that you need to be mature about. You need to understand yourself and all those things, but we don't have that. And so we get to 20 stories and we're okay. All of a sudden we go to 60, we still have that same foundation. So we're not teaching people to grow the foundation, which is your psyche, your mental health, along the way with your thought. There are billionaires that are incredibly stable. And I just love those kinds of people, and then there are billionaires that are just buffoons. And it's very obvious why, to me.
But I was going to say, you mentioned that speaking to a friend at a golfing event, and them reflecting on it. There must be plenty of people who've played the game, who've gone out, worked hard, earned for their families, worked long hours, done everything they can, and presumably many of them will be thinking, well, why do I still not feel a sense of happiness or satisfaction, or why am I still battling maybe addictions, or why do I still have these demons? I lived the dream. I've done everything I was told to do. I've played the game correctly. I've paid my taxes. Maybe they'd have read the article in the newspaper that have got a sense of that. But how do you teach that, or how do you say to somebody who wants to build an 80-story building, right, before you take off, you need to dig down?
God, 3 things come to my mind, but there are a little bit that I have to address on that. But real quick to why don't I feel as good? Because it's the same reason that when I did 1 line of cocaine, I felt X. But in 5 years from, 3 years later, I had to do 12 lines of that cocaine to feel that same X. Well, the same thing with business and success. I'll never forget when I thought my goal is I'm going to be worth $1 million. $1 million is what is going to be my net worth, right? And then when I became worth $1 million, it was as if it never happened. And I thought, this is gross. I got to be at least worth 300. Look at this guy. Look at that guy, whatever. Okay. At this point in my life, had I not got help, there was no amount of money or success I could have had that would have made me feel the same way I did when I opened my first store. I felt the same way opening my first store as I did my 17th store. They had no high. Okay. So that's one point to that. The other point is that we all know this stuff. Like, we know this, but everybody says, I can do it, but I'm going to do it differently. Like, I can do it, but I'm going to be healthier. Like, it's like playing with fire. Like, you're not supposed to, but they do, because they think that they can. And its third part of it is that it's too much work to delve into doing that underneath work. It's too hard. It's too hard. It's too much. So you'd rather say, oh, I can figure it out. Let me get this part first, because that's the hard part, where I'm never going to convince somebody. That's actually the easy part. Getting your money and the material things and that part, that's actually the easy part. But if your true goal is to be happy, do this part first, and then you can do whatever you want. But we're in a world of short-term fixes. We're in a world that, I'd rather take an anxiety pill. I'd rather take a depression pill. We're in this world where we don't want to do this work, which is why in many places I'm in a very lonely occupation, or my message is in a lonely place and not necessarily heard by lots of people here. Everyone loves it. No one wants to do it.
Is there another version of Parham somewhere else who is your age, but actually opened their first store, and rather than open 3, 4, 5 more stores, just kept that first store for a little bit longer and didn't go into addictions, that didn't turn to cocaine, and 25, 30 years later was just open it, a 17th store where there was just like a straightforward trajectory where you could carry that on for another 20, 25 years, no problems whatsoever. Is there another version of that guy? Could that guy have ever existed, do you think?
Absolutely. If I would have had the right help at the beginning, and there are people like that don't need the other stuff, right? I know plenty of people that are honestly happy. They work at the university. They're a college professor. They make a reasonable salary. They get their little pension every year. Their salary goes up 3%. And to me, I used to look at that and be like, I don't know how anybody can do that. Like, I don't know how anybody can like just go to work and know that they got to work till they're 60, and at age 62 they're going to retire. And like, I never understood that. But to be honest with you, I have more respect if they're healthy internally than I do somebody who became a billionaire and is all over the place. Because at the end of the day, it's all the same. They're still equally happy. Like, if you can assign a unit of happiness and they're at 8, okay, the goal is to be at an 8 or a 10 or 9 or whatever, right? However you do it is meaningless, you know, because when we die, I mean, I want to write this book that I want to interview 100 people on their deathbed, and business people and success people. And I guarantee not a single one will say, God, I wish I would have done one more deal. Man, I wish I would have had 1 0 in front of my net worth. They're just not going to think that. They're going to be thinking about connections, their family, their loved ones, all the things that really matter. And I always tell people, why can't you do that now? Like, why can't you think about those things and do those things now? But I will tell you, it's just really hard. It's even hard for me. I'm like, think about this stuff 24/7, and it's hard for me.
But I guess, you know, and we're in a society, though, where we measure success. The easiest way to do it is by numbers, and it's pound signs or dollar signs as well. If you were assessing someone's success, someone's happiness, what sort of metrics do you use now? What are those things that goes, actually, that's a success. That's a successful person.
Yes. When somebody is, okay, so there's a few of them. So first of all, they're calm in the sense that, they can have like an exciting personality, but they're calm in they're not all over the place. They're not up and down. They're not, okay. Number 2, they're not needy. They don't need compliments. Okay. If I meet somebody that doesn't need to be complimented or doesn't tell me, I just went out and shot like 75 yesterday, you know, did you see me? And I did the, you know, if they're not doing that to me, man, that's awesome to me. Like I really, and then people that are genuinely happy for other people's success. If you're truly happy for other people's success and you like watching a friend do well and you're just like, that's awesome. But you can absolutely provide other people with compliments and don't have to have it reciprocated. To me, it means that you have a very secure self-esteem. And to me, if you have a secure self-esteem, you cannot be unhappy.
Let's wrap this up. The book is out now, Perfect Pain. Parham Parastaran is the author. For people who are going through the pain at the moment, who haven't yet realised that it may or may not become perfect for them, what's your advice?
Well, you don't know what you don't know. You know, again, because of the rules, so we're set up with a series of rules, and these rules have been passed down. People are living them, and so basically, and that's how you get a definition of an event that happens to you, and someone puts one of 3 things to it. Either it was a bad thing, it was a good thing, or it was like a neutral, right? And so perhaps you can view life and view things that happen to you without putting a designation that this is good, bad, or it's okay, right? And if you can somehow eliminate that from your vocabulary and just be like, it's just an event. It's just an event, because you don't know that this event is not the best thing that ever happened to you, right? When I look back and the fact that I was abused for 1 year, yes, was that a bad thing? Yeah. But I have zero, I don't even like when people say you're a victim of sexual abuse. No, it was painful. It was a horrible thing, but without it, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I wouldn't be here maybe trying to inspire somebody else. So when we look back at certain things and we're like, oh, that's the best thing that ever happened. Well, try to do that while you're in the moment. We can do it later because that's easy. We had glasses and we put 20/20 vision on it, right? But if you can try to just live in the moment, in the present, and sort of take in things, and as Bruce Lee said, flow like water. Well, that was immensely wisdom of how he viewed life and how he went, and that's how he fought. Whatever came at him, he sort of adapted went with that flow. And I believe he was a deeply, deeply happy man, or deeply complete, or as close as it can get to self-actualization. Because if you can live in the present and not put a connotation that society is supposed to tell you that this is good, this is success, this is not success, I think you're going to have a very, very good chance of getting through whatever it is that you're getting through.
Perfect Pain available now. Really looking forward to the next book. 100 deathbed tales. I mean, good luck dealing with some sort of awkward family moments there as you sort of squeeze in with your pen and your notepad and try and ask some questions. But it would be a fascinating insight, wouldn't it?
That would be. I do. I mean, I really need to write, but I've interviewed. I talked to so many people. Especially now I'm getting to the age, I'm almost 50, and you know, my parents are getting older, and just some of those things that you thought were important become less important. And that doesn't mean you should, like my therapist always tells me, doesn't mean I shouldn't strive to become a billionaire or whatever. But don't do it because you want to be a billionaire, but do it because, like, you know, your business is going that way. And at the end of the day, you're going to do good things with that money. You're going to give it away. You're going to help people. You're going to do, you know, and you do them for those right reasons. But when we're doing them for advancing, you know, up climbing that ladder, all you're doing is taking another drink. You know, all you're doing is taking another drink. And then once you get to 2 drinks, now I'm telling you, if you want to go here, you're going to have to get used to drinking 3 drinks. It's a crappy way to live.
And I think as well, sometimes you see it in politicians who have been in power, say they were in the power through the 80s or 90s, and they were making sort of day-to-day decisions. They were making key decisions all the time because they had to make those decisions. And sometimes when you see them interviewed like 10, 15, even 20 years later, they're like completely different people who maybe have completely different political views because they can see all of those decisions in a much wider context, and they look at the things they should have done or would have done. And you see it with presidents, don't you? Prime ministers, when they've got 6 months left in office, they suddenly start making all these decisions thinking, I had all these plans 4 years ago, 8 years ago, and I've not been able to do it. And I think that thing of the retrospective view is the 2020 vision. But if you can just grab a little piece of it as it's moving along, then it might, you know, take away things like the regret that you might have, or the idea that you moved on and you should have done things in the past. And we all kind of live with those types of regrets. But if you can just think, well, I was making the decisions I was in the moment, of the moment, because I was there in the moment, maybe you can be more philosophical about how you think about how you made and why you made those decisions.
Yeah, and I think you would have less regret as a result of that too, because it's not about you, or, you know, it doesn't say that you were bad or you were dumb or you were just doing what you could see at that time. But the idea of, you know, going back to what we were saying, the idea of just trying to live as much in the present as possible that doesn't mean you don't reflect on the past and learn from the stuff. It doesn't mean that you don't have a vision for the future. It just means as a stimulus is coming your way, as things are happening in your life that way, is that you just kind of approach it that one day, that moment at a time. It's because it's when we put stuff onto it, is that's the one that makes us happy. Or sitting there worrying about the future that you can't control. I mean, people just worry. Like, how do they know about the future?
Now that's a book I would definitely read. Parham Predicts the Future.
Worry about the future when you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, you know.
Parham, congratulations on the book. Look forward to seeing the success of it as well. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Really appreciate you joining us for Mental Health Monday.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Great show and a good topic. I'm glad to see the UK is thinking about the important things.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. SHOUT to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.